मसाले तो बहुत हैं, पर प्रकृति की गोद से खास चुने मसाले जिनकी ताजगी, खुशबू और स्वाद रहे बरकरार, ऐसे उम्दा मसाले बनाते हैं सिर्फ कैच। कैच का कोई मैच नहीं, 100%।
As our next speaker, we have best-selling author Anand Neelakanthan, who has won numerous accolades for his contribution to the world of literature and now the Indian cinema. His latest book, Valmiki's Women, rises above the notion of patriarchy and retells the untold stories of lesser-known female characters in mythology. Madhavi Mahadevan, winner of the Author Award 2021 for her mytho-fiction novel Bride of the Forest, the untold story of Yayati's daughter, will be in conversation with Mr. Neelakanthan.
Hello everyone, I'm Madhavi Mahadevan, and it's my pleasure to welcome you all to the Times of India Literature Festival and this particular session with Anand Neelakanthan, the acclaimed author of many books that are mostly creative interpretations of the epics. Hi Anand, welcome.
Hi. Nice meeting you, Madhavi. It's always a pleasure to talk to a fellow author who works in the same space.
Thank you so much. Our topic of discussion today, Anand, is around your latest book, Valmiki's Women. We'll be talking about some of the characters in it and also your views on the various versions of the Ramayans. So I would like to tell the viewers that this is an unusual book. It brings to the forefront those characters who have largely been either completely reviled in the Ramayana, in the traditional tellings, or they have been ignored. Now, in this first category of women who have been reviled are two we know fairly well, Manthara and Shurpanakha, and then there is also a third, Taraka. Now, Anand, what I was struck by in your retelling or your interpretation of these women and their stories is that you have taken their lack of beauty head on and converted it into something else. This is so different from what we see in the popular imagination, where ugly is equal to wicked. And there's a line from one of the stories that evil looks ugly and ugly is evil. So I want to ask you, is this equation between physical beauty in women and virtuous nature found at all in Valmiki's Ramayana, or was it something that later versions came up with?
Associating evil and lack of beauty is a very common trait across cultures. Always, the wicked witch, how the witches look like. It's a common trait everywhere. Shurpanakha or Tataka has been shown. Shurpanakha, in many places, she is considered as beautiful until she loses her nose. But Tataka or Manthara were always described, even in Valmiki Ramayana, as looking ugly. Now, looking ugly is a very subjective term. It depends on from whose eyes, who is seeing it. So we know that even the concept of beauty changes over years or centuries. Now, it is an unfortunate fact that black, which was once the color of divine in India, the color of Krishna, color of Kali, color of Draupadi, color of Sita, is now associated with a lack of beauty because of the colonization and various other things happened. So now we have blue painted Krishna or white marble Krishna, even in the television series and other things. So my thing was a deliberate attempt. It is a satire also. Where when I'm putting these words, that beauty has got nothing to do with whether somebody is good or bad. whether how if a beautiful man or a woman can be evil too or can do evil deeds and vice versa. It's so random. There is no correlation between this. That's what
Absolutely.
I'm trying to say.
Yeah. Now, I want to ask you something. While I was reading the stories, I was especially of Manthara and Shurpanakha, I was reminded of my childhood experience of watching the Ram Leelas in the north. And whenever Kekai, Manthara, Shurpanakha came onto the stage, there would be a lot of there would be this excitement, because you were going to have high drama, high voltage drama with these women, and they were always over caricatured. They were never presented in any kind of attractive light, and this I feel has continued with television, where again you find these women presented in a very negative light. Now, why are we not uncomfortable now that we watch so much television? Why are we not uncomfortable with this idea at all?
We are the products of a lot of subjugation and colonization. I think that has changed because I grew up with Kathakali and Ottanthullal and other things. They use humor, but not much of this kind of caricature. Because every character has a very fantastic gear in Kathakali and all. So I'm not used to this. So for me also, when I came to Delhi and all, it was a shock seeing Ram Leela and other things. Not that I was surprised, because even in many South Indian films, it was there. It's not that it is totally new, but in the classical culture, that kind of caricature, making caricature out of these characters were not there. They were presented very sympathetically, especially Shurpanakha and all in Kathakali and other classical Indian tradition. I'm not talking about, see, Tulsidas Ramayan is a different story altogether. It is a product of its time.
Yeah.
It has deviated not in the plot, but in the way we see people.
Yeah.
Because it was written in a particular era. So
Yeah.
a lot of things have crept up, including the characterization of Sita,
Yeah.
which is quite contrarian to, quite different from what it is in many South Indian Ramayanas or Valmiki Ramayana. The docile, demure Sita is not the Sita of Valmiki. It's a Sita of
Yeah.
Tulsidas Ramayana. Even covering the head, I think, is a vestige of some other culture.
Yeah.
If you see, it's a the South Indian temples, neither man or woman is allowed to cover their head. It's considered rude. Whereas it's the other way around. But if you see the
Absolutely.
ancient sculptures and the paintings and all, men and women dressed alike. Most of them were bare from the waist. All of them were bare from the waist. You see all ancient paintings and sculptures in the temples. When did this change? When did women get relegated to the Antapura in a behind a parda, putting what do you call something on their hair to cover their hair, not showing the hair to their elders? In many parts of Rajasthan and other places of the north, wearing a veil. I'm not saying anything derogatory or anything. I'm saying there is a marked difference in the culture. Where did it come from? It is not a difference between north and south or east or west or anything like that. It's a difference between the classical culture which produced these kind of great paintings and sculptures, how women are deposited in that, and what we see in the medieval Gangetic plains, and even now, how the women are treated. Where did this come from? When did it change? When did a Gupta era deposition of paintings, where both men and women are bare-chested, change to the medieval era and the present era kind of things, where women are restricted inside the home, the women child is not prepared, and covering of your hair, the head, all these traditions, where did they come from? It's a fascinating thing. Because if you see historically in the south, where it was not subjected to this kind of invasions, the women's position was totally different, especially in Kerala and all. It continued to be a matrilineal society, and maybe around 100 years ago only the dress also changed. and
Yeah.
ethics and moralities and everything changed. So when I am writing Valmiki's women, I am not writing Tulsidas women or the sensitivity and the culture propagated by the medieval era devotional tradition. I have no disrespect towards that. It's a part of our history and culture. But that's why I named it as Valmiki's women, because it is more inspired by the tales where such kind of influences are not that prominent, and hence the characterizations are different.
Yeah, I think that that absolutely sort of ties in with what I read in the very first story, where you describe, it's called Bhumija, and where you describe Valmiki's inspiration very differently, and in the most beautiful terms, I must say. I loved all your stories. I can't decide which one is my favorite, but anyway, now I want to ask you another question. In the Ramayana, we see that, yes, women like Manthara, or in your versions, we see that women like Manthara, Tarka, Shurpanaka are very ill done by. Society is very unfair to them. But women like Dashratha's eldest child, his daughter Shanta, or even Sita, who are royal women, are also treated badly. And it seems to be that women across classes are oppressed, but aren't all these women game changers? I mean, would we have a Ramayana without even a single one of them?
That is the reason why they are in this. I have chosen them in the 5 stories also.
Yeah.
These women are very important, and they are not caricatures, and each had their reasons. So there is no see, one thing which I have been telling in many interviews and other things is Ramayana is not a tale of good triumphing over evil. It's not at all. That concept of good versus evil is not a part of our culture at all. Or rather, when these stories were written, it was not a part of our culture. We may have been influenced due to the accidents of history. But it is more about karma and karma bela. Once you say it's karma and karma bela, all these people are doing what they think is right. There is no evil per se. It's only by the angle from which you are looking at it, the other side looks evil. Take the case of Tataka. Tataka, how is Tataka evil, absolute evil? She didn't come to Ayodhya to attack anyone. She was living in her forest, following her dharma, following what is relevant to her, and she has this Yaksha and lineage, Gandharva lineage. So their dharma is to protect the plants, to protect the trees, protect the environment. They are tree spirits. So when sacrifices are done, isn't her duty to stop the sacrifices of animals? So most of these sacrifices involved, whether we deny it or not, if you go to the text, it is true that these all involved, like from Ashwamedha to Vajapaya to various other sacrifices, involved actual sacrifices of animals and various kind of animals.
Yes.
It is only after Buddha that most of these changed. So it's a known fact. So a person like Tataka, whose Kula Dharma is to protect the plants and other things, they will be trying to stop these kind of sacrifices. So from one side, she becomes evil. From other side, she becomes the protector, the mother of the forest. So I'm just telling the story from this side. When you tell it from the story from the Rishi side, it's a totally different story, like how you have heard about it. Same is
Absolutely.
the case with Shurpanaka.
Yeah, I'll just come to, I will, it's very hard to decide which story I liked best, but I would say that the one about Taraka, if I was asked, I would say that is the, the most amazing story because of its political content, which is also there, and all the suggestion that is in the story. I'll come to that a little later. I would like to ask you another question, connected with the writing of women. In your earlier novels, you have told stories about, badass men like Ravan and Duryodhan, badass in the popular imagination, and here at least two of the women who are generally regarded as nasty pieces of work, Manthara, Shurpanakha, you made them so human, tough and sassy, but also endearing. So is this only due to the fact that, different versions of the Ramayana, maybe the ones in the South see them differently, or was it your intention to rehabilitate them? Or were you trying to say that human nature, whether male or female, is no different? And if somebody is victimized, they will get angry.
The third is the correct one. See, there are sympathetic, in none of the Ramayanas, these are like characters of virtue or anything, even though many are sympathetic to them. So what I did was I just told, but none have attempted to tell the story by getting into their head. So that's what I have tried to do. What prompted them to do? Manthara was doing her dharma. Manthara's dharma was to protect her foster daughter Kaigeyi's interest, and she was doing it. So there are no, again and again I'm stressing this, we are seeing all these epics from a very Western or Abrahamic or Semitic angle, where there are clear-cut delineation of good versus evil and the good wins over evil. Whereas in our entire Puranas, pre-Islamic Puranas, this concept is absent. It is more about people doing their dharma, the dilemmas or the dharma sankat they face, and each acting according to their choice and paying or eating the fruits of their karma or the karma bell. So I'm trying again and again to pull it back from what it has become in the last 1,000 years or so. So it is from this same stand what I was doing, that in a much more beautiful way, and the ace dramatist Bhasa had written Urubanga or Pancharatra and other things. So I'm just following this part of the age-old tradition in my own humble way. That's all I would say.
No, I think we all benefit from the way you're following the tradition and also changing it, because you are doing that, and in a remarkable way. I would like to ask you, of course, among all these characters, it's an unfair question, but still I'm asking, which is your favorite?
In this
particular book, Valmiki's Women.
In this particular book, my favorite character is Shanta.
I'll come to her in a bit. And was it more difficult writing about women? You've written about men very well. I've read Asura and I've enjoyed it. But you've brought a sort of, what I've always found remarkable about your writing is the combination of irony and sympathy. What you call satire, and yet a very sympathetic approach towards the character. But in your portrayal of all these women, I found that that the sympathy factor was very nice. It was very, it wasn't, it was very genuine. So I want to ask you, was it very difficult writing women as opposed to writing men?
Definitely. No, no men can understand women, perhaps. So it's very difficult. I can only second guess it, because I have a lot of women who inspired in my life, like my mother, my sister, my wife, my daughter. But it's difficult to understand what goes in the mind. I can read my friends better than. So that enigma is always there. So there's a challenge writing about that. This is not the first time I'm writing. In fact, my Vanara is the one where it is actually Tara. I should have called it Tara. If you have read Vanara, even though it is a Bali Sugriva story, Tara is the hero of the story. So that is where I tried getting into the head of a woman for the first time, as far as writing is concerned. Then I followed out with the Bahubali, where Shivagami becomes the hero. And then comes this book. So in the last 3-4 books, 3 books of Bahubali plus the Tara plus last 5 books, perhaps I am trying to figure out how perhaps a different kind of women would think, how a sister would think, how a daughter would think, how a friend would think, how a woman like Surpanaga would think, how a Tataka would think. So I'm trying to see the different aspects of femininity and trying to figure it out through my writing. I'm not saying it is perfect or I can get it perfect one day, but there will be always a small lacuna when a man writes about a woman. It is something which you can't overcome, but it will be there. It's difficult.
I don't know if it's a lacuna. I would say that, I felt it was a very, very balanced, very sympathetic. You've not hidden away anything which is negative, but in fact presented it as one of the spectrum of part of the spectrum that is human nature. Everybody has something, positive, something negative, however you look at it. There are flaws, there are insecurities, and all of that comes through. So you've actually, what is called a Rakshasi, you have made her, you've taken away that label and made her very much, very acceptable, very lovable, in fact. Now, I wanted to ask you about the character that you spoke of. Would you like to tell, because she's completely new, people don't know too much about Shanta. So what made you choose her and what is so unique about her?
Shanta doesn't come in Valmiki Ramayana, to be frank. It comes, she is actually the Vyasa's character. So I cheated a bit because there is only one reference about Shanta, not even by her name, but has Dasharatha's daughter and who comes with her husband, Rishyasringa, for the Putra Kameshti. Shanta's story is told in detail in Ramopakhyana in the Vanaparva of Mahabharata. That is where she appears, and I have taken the story from there. So, without Shanta, there is no Ramayana. Without Shanta, there is no Ram. Without her sacrifice, there is no Ram.
Yeah.
Shanta could be any Indian girl. At least 90% of the Indian households, even now. Where even in a very loving household where there is no discrimination between the girl child or boy child, or even when the girl is more pampered, even in those houses, one of the common refrains or comments I heard, especially from the mothers, is that one day you'll have to go, as a girl grows up, one day you'll have to go to some other home. They are reiterating the fact that this is not your home.
Yeah, they are. They are.
Only the son belongs, practically both of them may go away in this era.
So do you?
But this is what is reiterated by the culture. There is no Putri Kameshti, there is only Putra Kameshti.
Yeah,
the only exception to that is the Janaga's family. And no wonder Janaka is called the wisest of all in all Upanishads and Puranas. Janaka doesn't have even a thought of having a son. His 4 daughters, or as per the alternate versions, his and his brother's daughters, all are girl childs. All of them, 4 of them. And he doesn't want a Putra Kameshti. He wants the best for his daughter, and that is why he conducts a Swayamvar. With the Trayambaka. So Shanta becomes the representative of any Indian girl child. So that is why it makes it very contemporary and today's story. Even in his deathbed, Dasharatha is still yearning for his sons, but none of them are there, and only the daughter is there. So that's the irony of it, and that is where it connects to most of the real life situations also.
Yeah, I think I'll maybe we have time for one question, big one, and maybe I don't know if there's time for small, but let's go for the bigger one first. And that is the question about the story of Tarika. As I said, I've read your novels, and now I have read your short stories, and your short stories are doing what the best short stories do. They suggest a lot more than what they say, and as I said, I found Tarika's story exceptional in this. Among the other things it talks about is that old way of life, the eco-friendly, egalitarian way of life. and the new way of life in which war stories are more popular, in which deceit, treachery, and violence is what these stories demand, and death is in fact glorified. Now, in this new way, power structures decide one's place in society and hierarchy, and it even decide, power structures also decide whether you should be allowed to live. For instance, there's a line in one of the stories, I think in Taraka only: all of you who don't accept our scriptures are Rakshasas. Now, this line sort of really resonated with me because it finds a lot of very alarming echoes in our times. As a writer in an extremely popular genre, how do you view the message that the mythologies are giving us? Or is it that we are interpreting them wrongly? Do we glorify the past, or do we dismiss it, or do we look for alternate versions, or do we create alternate versions?
First thing, none of the Puranas are old. They are old in the sense they are the age-old stories, that's all. But they are relevant every time and every day. And why they are relevant is because they get reinterpreted as per the time and the need. What cannot be reinterpreted, what cannot be changed is a dead thing. What is living will evolve, and people, the writers, the bards, the poets, the readers will find newer and newer meaning to them, or infuse newer and newer meaning to that. So the kind of political statements I am making, they were relevant then, they are relevant today, and they will be relevant in the future too. If the only thing we learn from Puranas is about glorification of an imaginary past, an imaginary glorification of an imaginary past, then it is the greatest injustice we are doing to that. Because they don't put a date, they are never put a date. They are told this as an eternal story, that it happened so, itihasa is it happened so, and Sambhavami Yuge Yuge, it keeps happening, it will happen again and again. They are timeless. If you are only finding atom bombs and nuclear weapons in that, which they didn't have, people who are going in the chariots, it's difficult to imagine that they only had atom bombs and no other inventions. It is just to describe about the devastation of war that such things are, the poetic freedom is taken. If you start searching for plastic surgeries and atom bombs in the past, we will miss the great messages that these great accomplishment of human civilization is offering us. It offers us a way of life that is non-judgmental. It tries to show all kind of lifestyle. It shows the importance of one's choices. That is what I see in that. If somebody wants to see nuclear reactors in that, it is their choice. But for me, it is about getting inner peace. For me, it is getting harmony in life. And reading them or writing them is a sort of meditation, calming myself. So I try to do that, and I try to make it relevant for now and for the future. Whether it happens or not depends on luck and my skill. Luck I cannot control, skill I can keep working on. Let us hope I will write it something which is immortal.
There's one question which I think we have just time for that, and that is that traditionally when it comes to our creativity, the Indian way of storytelling, whether it is in the performance art, or it is in music, or it is in sculpture, painting, whatever, we have this balance of rasas, the navarasas as we call them. And this in a way gives a very rounded kind of storytelling. It's not the domination of vibhats rasa. You will also see compassion, you will also see laughter, hasya ras, which is there very much in your writing all across in the novels, and it is even there, though muted in these stories that I'm now reading, that I've just finished reading. So I want to ask you, when one reads Valmiki's Ramayana, for instance, it is said that that shloka which came out very naturally was came out of shok, came out of his grief or his sorrow. But you've turned it around in that first story and made it something else altogether. How I mean, do you see our creative storytelling in view? How do you see it? What have you done with it?
What I did was I just went beyond. Why should a great saint like Valmiki curse a hunter who is just trying to quench his hunger? It's a natural thing, no? A tiger, instead of that hunter, if it was a tiger that pounced upon these birds, could he have the same thing? So why is he going natural? So I found maybe there is more to it. And then this is what came to my mind. No, it is Ramayana is not about what you call good versus evil, and Valmiki is not going to preach us. Valmiki is like a great storyteller that he is going to show us what is life. He's going to show the mirror. If you see evil in that, it is yourself you are seeing it. If there is poetry in that, it is yourself you are seeing it.
Yeah.
He is showing the society a mirror. That is why he didn't hide the flaws of Ram. He says Ram as Lord Rama as someone with 16 qualities, and in spite of that, he never shies away from showing the flaws of Ram or the greatness of Ravan wherever it is required, or that of any character. He doesn't shy away from showing the flaws of Dasharatha. And like any postmodern telling, he himself becomes a character as Uttar Ramayana comes.
Yeah.
Just like Vyasa himself become a character. Yeah. So these are all like, so I just tried to go into the Valmiki's mind. And one revelation for me was Ramayana is not Ramayana, but it is Sitayana.
It is Sitayana. Yeah.
Sita is the most important character. Sita is the Prakriti. Sita is the nature of humans, the nature of the world, the nature of the universe. Yeah. And as a poet, you will see love in the nature. If you can't see love in the nature, you are not a poet or an artist. So this is how I conceived Valmiki, tried to go inside his mind and do it. And then the perspective became rounded, like everyone is doing their dharma. The snake that is hunting, it wants to quench its hunger. The bird is trying to protect his kids, it is his motherly love. The male bird is trying to protect it, and it is his dharma. And the mother of the wife of the hunter, she is doing her dharma. So that is a revelation for Valmiki, that what should he write? Should he just preach to people that don't do any evil? Or should he write something much beyond that? And that is Ramayana.
Absolutely. So well said. I enjoyed the book. I loved this discussion. And I hope, as from a much sort of very admiring reader of yours, I hope you will one day also write, now that you've done Valmiki's Women, maybe you'll have a look at Vyasa's Women. And
the next one is that.
Oh, excellent. Wonderful. That's very good news. I wish you all the best, and thank you so much.
Thank you. And on a parting note, I have written many Ramayanas, many lessons as an audiobook. It's in Amazon Audible. So this one, all the versions which I have encountered, I'm telling the entire Ramayana story, but every main incident, I'm pausing and saying how it is in other Ramayanas and what are the lessons we can learn about it. It is both available in English and Hindi. So it's free for members. Your credit will not go if you're an Audible member. You can download it for free. So please do hear that. It's around 12 to 14 hours, English 12 hours, Hindi 14 hours, performed by voice artists, and they have done it beautifully. So that's one request. It will open up, I hope, another perspective of Ramayana.
Yeah, I'm sure it will, because your books always trigger off discussions, interesting discussions, and that I think is the way forward. So thank you once again, Anand. Wish you all the best.
Thank you so much, and all the best for your future works.